Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt with the Christ School of Theology within the Institute of Lutheran Theology. You're viewing a lecture within a course dealing with the philosophical underpinnings of the theological tradition. We're up into the 12th century here. So we've made headway in this course, right? We're up to Peter Abelard. And I talked last time a little bit about Peter Abelard's logic and metaphysics. This time we'll talk about what might be called his philosophy of language. Of course, it wasn't called that in the day. But this what we'll deal with here is some semantic issues and what's going on with language, according to Abelard. He follows the tradition in distinguishing a name, a verb, and sentences. Names and verbs together make up sentences. This was standard way of thinking about these things. Names are significant, simple words conventionally applied. Now, there's a lot of meat in that sentence. When I say significant, I don't mean important. Okay. When we're back in these days, when we talk about significance, we're talking about significatio, the Latin term. And the significatio, this term, is a technical term in semantic theory in the Middle Ages. A significatio is a property of the term. One might say it's the deepest property of a term. Significare, which is the infinitive, means to signify. And what is it to signify? It's to make the mind think about something. So the term has a significance in that it brings to mind something in the hearer. Now, we could claim that the significance of a term is a lot like sense or the intention of a term in modern parlance. But we have to be very careful with that, because in modern parlance, to talk about the sense of a term is to talk about a meaning, a sense meaning, not the extension, but the intention. But that sense meaning doesn't necessarily have causal overtones. Significare has causal overtones. To signify something is to bring to mind something in the hearer or the reader. Now, this significare, signifying function, must be distinguished from the, if you can read this, nominatio, which you would think would mean naming, right? But here for Abelard, it means the reference of the thing named. So a term has a significance, and this significance calls to mind something in the hearer, and through this significance, there is a reference made, a nominatio. Now, however, names are conventionally applied. They have a significance, they bring to mind something, but there's still an element, naturally, of convention in a proper name, or even another name, that there is a history of usage of these names. And so this name, for instance, ass, back to last time, to talk about the animal, right, that carries things on its back. it has a significance, but it is also conventionally applied to those kinds of animals. So proper and common names, which have significance, refer to things, nominate things, right, through the imposition of the word to the thing. And oftentimes this happens when you don't even know the significance of the term. This happens when you're a kid. Native Americans, when you're a kid and you hear your first Native American terms, you might think that a word like wounded head would be an odd name for a person, right? But of course, that's because we understand the sense, the signification of wounded head, and we understand that that has a lot of significance. But we don't understand the sense of Federmaus, for instance, right? Well, if you're German, you do. But when we use a different language, we don't understand the sense of that, and we know that the name applies to the thing. Conventionally, we know that, but we don't really hear the sense. Well, this happens a lot in our language use, if you think about it, right? His view, because of this conventional nature of things, this imposition, even though there's a significance, it's the imposition finally that determines the reference. And so as King argues, at least, his view really amounts to a theory of direct reference, where names are conventionally applied to things apart from their sense. So even though we start with significance here, and significance does call to mind something in the other, it seems like much of what Abelard is arguing here is a theory that says that imposition of name is more important than significance in determining the nominatio, the reference. Proper names are semantically singular referring expressions. That means they refer to one thing. Common names, according to Abelard, have a plural signification. A common name refers to concrete individuals, but not to them as individuals, right? It refers to individuals, but not to them as each individual. It rather picks out individuals having a particular nature. So common name sheep picks out all those sheep, right? It picks them out because they have a resemblance, nature of sheep. So it does not pick them out as Avis the sheep and Betty the sheep and Emma the sheep. Okay. Now this nature that all these sheep have is not a metaphysically common shared thing for Abelard, and this is something that he constantly seems to argue. He wants to deflate our claims about such things as natures. We'll talk about this a little bit, but it's almost more like he wants to say just because we talk this way about things having a particular nature, it doesn't mean that they have a particular nature, right? That there's not something that is a nature, but that we pick them out, and it's the picking out of them by this nature that is more important than the natured thing that is picked out, if you will. Names have signification, though, again, signification is posterior to the nominatio. The impositio, or the imposition, determines the nominatio. The signification concerns the informational content which is carried in the concept of the thing. So the term has a signification that carries content, informational content. Now, This is where he gets very interesting. He's not saying that the signification of a thing, even though he's saying that the signification calls to mind something, he's not talking about whatever Al thinks when he hears the word bark, and what Bob thinks and what Kevin thinks. He's not talking about the psychological associations of the term that each person has, but he's talking about something more objective. Now, if this seems hard, well, then read Frege. I mean, he says the same thing, right? The sense isn't a psychological association, it's an objectivity. Verbs, he says, differ from names in having a connective force, a vis copulativa. And, of course, in the medieval period, what's very important, of course, is that, you know, you give an analysis of the noun. It seems a little easier than giving an analysis of the verb or things that aren't nouns, the things that make up the predicate. So there is something about a verb that's different than a noun. Well, Frege talked about this as an unsaturatedness, if you will. And maybe there's something a little bit like this going on. You can, of course, take a thinker and make some comparisons here or there. But the total meaning of the sentence is a function of the names and the verbs comprising it. So the verbs have to be saturated, right? In order, yeah, well, I take, is a horse is a predicate. Is a horse, Bicephalus is a horse. There, you have a sentence. Bicephalus is a horse. It's a function of the name, Bicephalus, and the verb is a horse. Of course, that's an intransitive predicate there, but maybe you see what I'm trying to say. Sentences, propositiones, do not signify mere understandings that Hank or Bob or Stacy might have, but they signify the dictum of the sentence. So a proposition, now this is tough, brings to mind the dictum of a sentence, but the dictum is not what might be brought to mind by a mere person. There is a dictum that is, it's almost like a normative notion, ought to be brought to mind by a rational thinker. Even though Bob over there might be thinking when he hears a sentence about, you know, great Minnesota Twins games of the past. I don't know. Who knows? But none of these moves here are idiosyncratic and the kind of thing that that don't have a long trajectory within philosophy. I mean, all of these things are explored in the subsequent philosophical tradition. And of course, standardly now, when we think about the intention of a sentence and its extension, we say that the extension or the reference of a sentence is its truth value, and its intention, the intention of a sentence, is the proposition expressed. And what is the proposition expressed? Well, it seems to be a dictum. The what is saidness, right? So this is very, very current in some ways. But this dictum, these dicta, plural of dictum is dicta, these dicta have no ontological standing. A sentence says something, but there is no thing that it says. So we want to give a deflationary account of dictum, right? And his basic strategy is to give a deflationary account of things to take a bit of the bloat out of our ontology. He gives a deflationary account of truth. Truth is nothing more than the assertion of what the sentence says. P is true if things stand in the way P says. We don't need something more than that to get at truth. Now we're going to talk a little bit about his philosophy of mind. Of course, the term philosophy of mind is not a term that was used in the Middle Ages. But we talk about philosophy of mind when we talk about such questions as intentionality, right? The nature of intentionality. Aristotle thought that intentionality was either explained by having the form of the thing in mind or a resemblance of the form of the thing. Oh my goodness. So we have a guy here. There's his head. And here's a Christmas tree. Okay. For Aristotle, there is a sense in which the species of the tree, right? The form, which is either the intelligible species of the thing or the sensible species of the thing, is brought into the mind. So you would have a form. Of course, this is a very bad drawing because all I'm doing here is pointing out brains. And of course, I think all of you who have ever dissected a brain knows you're never going to find the form of a Christmas tree in a brain. This is called the mind-body problem, right? Brains seem to be different kinds of things than minds. Brains have a bunch of physical characteristics, but thoughts don't seem to have any physical characteristics at all, do they? So Aristotle thought that one is attending to or has an intention towards a Christmas tree if either of these things happen. On one account, the very form out here is now in mente, in the mind, or a resemblance of the form out here is brought in mente. Well, Abelard's a pretty bright guy. He says, well, it can't be that this thing out here is brought in there because mind has no physical properties, right? The form of a thing has physical properties out here, but the mind has no physical properties, so how could the form here be the same form as in there if this form is physical there and here it's not physical? This, by the way, is still a very big issue. He rejects the second because even if we were to bring the resemblance of this into here, how would we interpret this? Now you're going to have to think of the form of the thing somehow here before my mind. You can think about what it is to be before the mind. Now I'm going to interpret it. And of course, as Wittgenstein very famously said, there's a sign, but I need a sign to interpret the sign, and a sign to interpret the sign interpreting the sign, because we can be lost in an endless play of an interpretation here. So the aboutness the concept has with the thing cannot be explained by its resemblance. He concludes thus that intentionality is a primitive and irreducible feature of mind. All of you who like late 19th century continental thought will like this, right? Brentano, Meinong, right? This could be thought to be an adverbial theory of thought, which of course is a bit different than what I just said, but anyway, intentionality is a primitive and irreducible feature of mind. Okay, he held that understandings of a complex are functions of the understanding of simples comprising them. At this point, I'm going to take a short break on Abelard. We'll be right back. That was a bit heavy. It's not heavy enough to do it justice, but it's probably already too heavy to make it an introductory lecture exactly. So I'll be back with something that might be more fun. Come right back.